going green creates exponentially more jobs than it actually gets rid of. And so I think that's the number one thing that we have to think about, is that very often this transition is framed in a negative economic perspective, right? It's going to take a ton of money. It's going to take a ton of jobs. It's going to, ruin our economy. And actually all the data says the opposite. It's going to create way more jobs than it takes away. And actually, to save our economy, we have to do this. We have no other choice.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CleanTech is the podcast. This is episode 32. And today our episode is a conversation that we had with Candice Ammori, who is a Michigan native, currently working with On Deck, which is basically a learning platform to help professionals pivot their careers into new areas, is probably the best way I'd describe it. And she has a very interesting experience professionally and how she ended up at On Deck. But right now she is in charge of running their ClimateTech fellowship, helping people upskill themselves into the ClimateTech space. So very interesting and very important work she's doing. I think just generally speaking, this is a very interesting conversation for me to have, or it was a very interesting conversation because, working in the talent space as my day job, this was interesting to see how so many people are going to be upskilled to, enter into these new jobs that are not really a thing. And obviously helping to ensure that the people who are currently in the existing conventional methodologies and types of work will not be put out of work by this. I think that's a really big important aspect of the entire ClimateTech movement, is being aware of the perhaps you could consider it negative consequences of building a new industry. So I think it was a very interesting conversation. Of course, before we do get into it, I want to mention our sponsors, Next Wave Partners. Next Wave Partners are experts in the talent acquisition and recruitment space across climate tech, renewables, ESG, and technology. They support global markets, and so if you're looking to make a transition in your career, or you're looking to grow your team, please do consider reaching out to Next Wave Partners. You can reach out to them at next-wavepartners.com, or you can reach out to one of their consultants directly by going to their LinkedIn and connecting with the consultant in your space. So without any further delay, let's get into the show. All right, welcome to the podcast. Candice, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me, Silas.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. We're really, really excited to have you on today. So I guess for everybody listening, can you just give us a quick introduction about yourself, maybe a little bit of the history, some of your accomplishments, and then we can get into how you got to where you are.
Absolutely. So I was born in Michigan, went to University of Michigan, studied business and policy with some focus on environmental science. Back then, so this was in 2008, I guess, when I started college, and the professors knew that we were headed in the direction that we're headed in. And actually all of the models have been pretty spot on actually for the last 30 years. Well, some of the models have been. And so when I took the environmental science classes, professors were a bit, I would say, burnt out of having the conversation without anything really moving. Mm-hmm. And so I actually didn't stick with environmental science. I thought policy and business could be a better route for me to actually make a difference. So that's the route that I went down. And then I moved to Southeast Asia. I taught business communications in Singapore, worked in microfinance in Cambodia, and kind of always wanted to figure out how to do good with business or with policy. When I moved back to Michigan, I got involved in tech. And that's when after that, I was part of Techstars and did some more work in Michigan. But after that, I moved to New York, worked in technical sales, was on the founding team of a VR company. And that was, I think, the biggest inflection point. Was I was working in New York. I think I lost a sense of mission and just was like, all right, cool, I'm working in tech, right? Like what good does this do? I can think of some good, but it doesn't feel like it's the good that I want to be doing. And that's when I got really interested in the ethics of AI. And so for 5 years, I'd really put environmental and climate things besides me. I'd always been interested, but didn't actually do any work in it. Ethics of AI sounded really interesting. So I started a grad program at University of Michigan in statistics and was planning on getting a PhD, working on the ethics of AI for the rest of my life. And that would be the mission that I was going toward. But instead, in 2018, the IPCC report came out, and that was my first semester of grad school. And that completely shifted everything for me. I felt like I had this, I would call it my existential crisis, or some people can call it an aha moment, right? And I just realized that climate was the space that I wanted to be in. And so and then I started the On Deck ClimateTech program, which I'm sure we'll go into a bit more deeply, but that's the full history, I would say, from college to ending my grad program.
Got it. So could you talk a little bit more about the thought process that went in, especially you mentioned there's an inflection point in your career where you really just felt like, hey, I'm not really achieving what I should be here. Kind of, could you walk us through the thought process and kind of how long it took you to realize that? Because I feel like there's probably a lot of people who are kind of debating this, like, hey, should I be looking at changing? What should I be doing? Like, can you just walk us through those kind of parts of your life?
Yeah, so I guess there were two inflection points within like a year. One was when I was like, I want to do the ethics of AI and give up this just general tech life. And I decided to come back to Michigan and do the grad program. And I actually had to do a year of computer science and math to even get into the grad program because there were requirements that I was missing. And the thought process there was just something's missing. I'm really interested in this other thing. I know that logically, my grad school is paid for. Like, I think my thought process was very much gut first, where I realized something was missing, and I knew that there was something that really brought me alive. And then logical second, where I understood my finances, understood that I would be okay if I made that shift. And so that was shift number one. Shift number two is, I think I'm still almost in that shift, where from 2018 until now, I've been digging into climate in whatever way I can. So while I was still in the grad program, my decision was to not drop out immediately. So instead of getting a PhD, I finished with a master's. And part of why I did that was it actually bought me time, right? I had 2 years where I could just be learning. And some of that learning was in data science, which I knew would be helpful in climate. And I knew that I could, if I wanted to use that in the climate space. But I also got the chance to take sustainable finance classes and take all these extracurricular classes that were really interesting and rounded out some of my education, so that when I did leave the grad program and got into climate, I think I just had a lot more time to understand the landscape, understand what I was interested in, and it bought me that time. And so I think for an inflection point, personally, it's gut first, logic second, but it just feels like something I have to do, and I just have to figure out how to make it work.
No, that makes sense. I think that it's I think every person goes through. I obviously went through this kind of similar type of I don't know if you call it crisis, or just trying to figure out what is the purpose really earlier, but it wasn't around this topic of climate tech. I kind of fell into it. But I think that that's important for people to know that other people who may appear very successful on the outside have gone through the journey too. So I appreciate you sharing that. So I guess I'm curious a little bit. Could you talk a little bit more about what you're doing with On Deck then, and just kind of elaborate on what this program is? I've heard pretty good things about it from many people in the market, so very curious to hear more.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. The history of it started when I was about to graduate from my grad program, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do in climate. And I was thinking that starting a company would be interesting, or just starting something would be interesting, but I had no idea what I was doing. So I figured that being matched with, or at least in a community with people who are very climate deep, whereas I could bring the entrepreneurial pieces, the data science pieces, the tech pieces, would be really helpful. And there's some of those communities exist, but I think I wanted just a more intentional community that was time bound and cohort based. So I actually pitched an idea very similar to what I ended up building at On Deck in the ClimateTech program. And then a couple of weeks later, Eric, who started On Deck and also happened to be in one of my first classes at U of M with me, reached out and said, I don't know where you're at in life, but I know that you want to do something in climate. We are thinking about building out a program in climate. It'll be the first sector program at On Deck. This is what we do. This is why I think we'd be a great fit. And it ended up just being perfect timing, because instead of doing it on my own, I thought, well, On Deck has this great team. It's small. It was probably 13 people at the time. Now I think we're up to 250, a little bit more than a year later. So it's definitely grown incredibly quickly since I've been there. But yeah, it was just, if I want to make an impact and I want to build this community, and that's really what I'm here for, then doing it with On Deck makes a lot of sense. And so the program at its essence is meant to bring together climate deep people. So people of 20, 30 years of experience in utilities, oil and gas, climate science, just got their PhDs in some sort of niche carbon removal space. Like those are our climate deep folks. And those are about half of the people that we want in our program. The other half are entrepreneurial deep. So people have started, built and sold sometimes billion-dollar companies, computer science engineers, or professors at Ivy League colleges who want to come into the climate space, either as generally founders. Most of them are looking to found companies, and some of them are advisors as well, or investors in the space. We want to also balance that, where it's about 80% founders and 20% advisors. And that was actually our old model. And so just in the last month, On Deck as a whole just announced On Deck X, ODX, and it's an accelerator program. It's a $100 million fund where we invest $125K for 7% in early stage companies. And we also will take a bet on people pre-idea, and that's one of the innovations. The first innovation was just building community before building a fund. The second is betting on people before anyone else will bet on them. And so a lot of our climate work now is shifting toward how to be helpful to the founder, how to get more people into the accelerator who are climate tech companies, so that we can be helpful to them long-term and just help them make impactful companies. So that's kind of the evolution of, even in the short year, probably 13 months that I've been there, what the climate tech program used to be and what it is today.
Got it. I'm very curious to understand. I've honestly, on this podcast, I've seen a lot of people that I think, to me, it's always seemed that the technical folks, the people who understand the actual science and engineering behind these solutions, they're the ones who hold the keys to the future, to building these next companies. But I'm curious to see what your insights have been working with, different business leaders who are very interested and have business acumen, but don't have technical acumen, and then kind of how they work with the technical people and what their thoughts are on it. I'm just really curious to hear that dynamic and kind of the insights you've seen.
Yeah, so there are a lot of interesting pieces that are a lot of different threads that we can go down. So the first thread is, if it's a truly technical innovation, then you still need to commercialize it, right? And so you still need that person who can understand the business side of things, the technical side of things. That's, like technical meaning software, right? If it's going to be some sort of tech company as well. So the thesis around On Deck Climate Tech was that if we can get like really, really deep, climate deep people to pair up with really, really awesome entrepreneurial people. And there's this huge influx, and I'm sure, Silas, you know this, like you've spoken to a lot of them, this influx of incredible people in general tech, or just in general industries, who are coming into climate tech. And by the way, in 10 years, general industries are all going to be climate tech. It's like, it's a sort of looping in from general industry to climate tech to soon it'll be everything. But those people are actually incredibly helpful, because if you pair, I think, climate deep person with an entrepreneurial deep person, the chance that the company that they come up with is going to be scalable and therefore be able to make a larger impact, if they are looking to scale and do that sort of play, is just higher, right? And so I think that's one place where we can put those types of people, is pair with people who have complementary skills, deep in climate, and build a company together. The other place that we can think about people with entrepreneurial skills in the climate tech space is they can make impacts on their own, right? And so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in decarbonizing our industry or our economy. And one example is Jigar Shah, and he started Generate Capital and essentially saw that the reason why solar wasn't expanding or scaling as quickly as it could was actually not a technical problem. There was nothing wrong with the solar panels, and they're getting better every year, but like his innovation wasn't on the technical side. It's actually on the finance side, and it was in project finance. And they've done incredibly well, and they work on sanitation, and they work on all these different pieces to help scale solutions that are technically sound and don't actually need that sort of innovation, but they need financial innovation or business innovation. And so I like to be very clear that when I talk about climate tech, I am including any sort of innovation in the climate space, not just technical ones. And then I think the last piece is that when we're talking about founding companies, again, pairing with a deep climate person or starting a company that's more focused on the business innovation side is great. The other thing is that like people with an entrepreneurial background getting into climate tech can be advisors, can be investors, can be people that are like maybe not the founders right away if they don't want to do that, but they can be really helpful to the ecosystem and help those deep climate scientists who maybe are taking something from the lab and bringing it to the real world, or commercializing it more widely, can help them do that. So those would be some of the caveats I would say around that question.
Yeah, I think it's just fascinating. Given like you mentioned that everything will be climate tech at some point, right? I think that to me, this is why, while this is obviously a massive crisis we face, it's also extremely exciting because of all the innovation that's going to happen, right? So I think it's great what you guys are doing there. I'm really excited to see how it continues to grow. Maybe could you talk a little bit about how industries that are being affected, you could say negatively, obviously, I think it's all positive in this case, but people, industries that are going to probably lose workforce because we're shifting to different models. What can be done or what is being done maybe on a policy side, or what have you seen in other countries, regardless of where you see it from, to help these people transition into new jobs using their existing skills with just a little bit of upskilling to transition them into the new era?
There's an incredible statistic that I wish I remembered that comes out of Repowering America, and that's Saul Griffith's nonprofit in the US around how do we electrify everything and actually make our climate goals a reality. He's super tangible, just incredible. He just came out with a book called Electrify, MIT Press. Highly, highly recommend it. But there's a statistic there around how actually like going green creates exponentially more jobs than it actually gets rid of. And so I think that's the number one thing that we have to think about, is that very often this transition is framed in a negative economic perspective, right? It's going to take a ton of money. It's going to take a ton of jobs. It's going to, ruin our economy. And actually all the data says the opposite. It's going to create way more jobs than it takes away. And actually to save our economy, we have to do this. We have no other choice. And so that reframing is incredibly important, first off. And then secondly is everyone, maybe not everyone, but almost everyone in the modern economy has to upskill at some point, has to continue learning. We're almost all knowledge workers. If we're not knowledge workers, we're working with technology or construction or materials that are constantly changing and becoming different sorts of materials or technologies. And so I think that it's very easy to take a book out of the general upskilling world, and that's been done in tech, in construction, in all these different spaces. And so it's not that different for climate tech, but it's something to consider. It's not a problem, and I think that's the reframe that we need.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it just obviously misses the point. I think it's partly because everything is hyper politicized in the US with all the the negative side effects. But there's really like every company I've interviewed on this podcast, I don't see any downsides, right? It's always like it costs you less, it's better for the environment, and you'll get more customers. Like it's just win-win-win. So I appreciate to hear those statistics. Maybe if you can send those along, I'll link them into the show notes for afterwards. Maybe one thing worth talking about with your background in policy, what are your thoughts on how involved the government should be in helping to kind of promote policy or to create things that essentially force these habits to change? And do you think that there should be a sunset on when those policies work? I just want to hear your general thoughts in the space, and then I want to go on to another question regarding kind of government involvement after.
Of course. So I just pulled up the statistics in mobilizing for a zero carbon America, and it's Rewiring America. I probably called it Repowering America. Rewiring America's first publication, Mobilizing for a Zero Carbon America, came out, I think it was last July, so a little bit over a year ago. and it laid out a blueprint for decarbonizing the US by 2035. And in the publication, he very clearly lays out how you can create 25 million jobs in every US zip code in the process, which is absurd, right? And it saves, also electrifying everything, saves the average American household $2,000 per year in energy costs. And it's just like, it's the obvious thing that we have to do. And so to answer your question around policy, it's incredibly, I mean, we're just coming out of COP, right? And it's just incredibly frustrating to know that policy is this huge lever that if we pulled it would just be able to make a really big difference, but we actually can't rely on it because politicians aren't using it as the lever that it should be. And so, you know, people have been talking about a carbon price or carbon tax for many years. That is going to happen and it's going to make a difference, but it's a bit too late for it to make as big of a difference as it could have if we implemented it when we first talked about it. So that's a piece of policy that, again, is going to happen. Question is when, and when it does, it again won't be that as impactful as it could be. You know, ending subsidies for fossil fuels is such an obvious policy that we still don't do. That is something, and that's worldwide. I think the movement, the ESG movement, so the environmental social governance movement in banking, is super interesting, right? Because Chase and a lot of these big banks are some of the biggest financiers of fossil fuels, and that just needs to end. So those high level, those are the policies that have to be changed. Policy is like such a big, what's that physics term where it's like, it's stagnant movement, right? Like if we could get it to be moving, it would make such a big impact and it would be so exciting. But that is why I personally respect people in policy so much, because they are fighting such a hard fight where the amount of effort that they put in is not very often tied to the outcome that they get. It's just it's politicized. So much respect for those folks. And I also know that I, at least right now in my life, can't be on the policy side because I just would get way too frustrated. And so that's why, you know, all the respect, I think it's a huge lever that I would love to be helpful in helping to pull. I want to do my part. I want to build communities and get them to also think about, you know, local government and how to make those changes. But it's not what I can focus on right now. What I'm focusing on right now is the lever of entrepreneurship and investment in the private space. And any private public partnerships are also fantastic. So yeah, that's my thought on policy. I think it could be massively impactful, and we have just scratched the surface. So one quick example, right? Like 2 weeks ago or a month ago, it came out that the ozone layer is actually closing, but I think it's 2035 or 2050. At some point that we know of, it's actually going to close the gap in the ozone. And that was such a big deal. I think 15 years ago, it was like, oh my God, the ozone it's just going to be a giant hole at some point and it's going to eat us alive, right? Like it was terrifying, and that's where the data was trending. But there's a treaty, like a global treaty, that actually has been impactful in closing that ozone, because countries came together and said, this is terrifying. Let's make sure that we do what the data suggests that we need to do. I haven't seen that level of treaty and of collaboration and compromise across different countries that we need in climate. And it's possible, it can make a big difference. It's not happening today.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't make sense why. I mean, I think Tom Rand talked about it in his book, The Case for Climate Capitalism. And obviously, you know, Canada's economy is much smaller than the US, for example, but he recognizes the fact that the countries who get this right and who get in front of this are going to they're going to be the future, right? They're going to be where people want to move. It's going to be, you know, leading in terms of technology. It is the future. So I find it interesting that we have such an opportunity for innovation across everything we do, right? Everything will be changed, everything we do in day-to-day life. But yet so many countries are just sleeping on it, you know, and of course not doing the right thing. You mentioned one thing, public-private partnerships. I actually wanted to go on to this topic, which is, I believe I chatted with Jonathan Reichenthal about this at one point, which is kind of the ways that possibly we can help ensure government entities, whether that's on a municipal or county level, are kind of doing things better in a more, more agile, startup-y way. I know obviously government is created in a way specifically to not be too quickly moving. Obviously, that can create some instability, but I'm curious what you're seeing or what your thoughts are on how local people can get involved in their local governments, or even on a larger, maybe a federal scale, people can get involved to help create a faster turnaround period with some of these policies and just with the way things are done.
That would be incredible. I know that government is trying to get involved, and often cities are at the forefront. There's a lot of really interesting climate things that are happening. That's where I would say the public-private partnership piece is most interesting. So Lacey, for example, is the LA CleanTech Accelerator. That's not the right acronym, but you get the point. And it's based out of LA. And that's like a public-private sort of partnership. And then there's the Activate program, which I think mostly comes from philanthropy, some government money, and it spun out of a government program, I believe. And so when I think of public-private partnerships, those are the sorts of programs that I think of, where it's actually government giving their money and entrusting it with people who can move quickly and can iterate and can help companies get those city contracts, right? Like a lot of clean tech requires working with government. And so that's a successful example. And then to your question around getting more people to be involved at the local government, we have a fellow who, her name is Caroline Spears, and she started Climate Cabinet. And the whole idea there is to understand that you have a ton of power, mostly at the local level. And so, yes, you should vote at the federal level and vote for the next president, vote for the governor of your state if you live in the United States. But also know that you actually can go to a board meeting and help to decide or vote on the board member of your local utilities. And those people get to decide whether you're using coal or solar, right? And so go to those meetings, it'll actually take less time and it'll have a bigger impact. And so, so that sort of work I think is really interesting. And at the end of the day, it's really just getting people together to make an impact and understand, I think, where those levers are, right? Like I think it's such a complex system that if we can figure out what the tipping points are and where the levers are, where we have more power than the effort that we put in, especially as a community and especially as we come together, then we're unstoppable. But it's naming those levers and making sure that people understand it and understand exactly what they need to do to push those.
Yeah, that makes sense. I find it interesting. Just obviously the types of people, right, that tend to go into government jobs are not normally entrepreneurial people, right? That's the issue that we kind of face, is that it's the law of attraction, right? And I find it interesting that there are cities out there, I think Palo Alto is one of them, that's trying their best to attract more entrepreneurial people and kind of get those, maybe they're called entrepreneurs more accurately, but I find it interesting, and I'm excited to hopefully see some innovation in that space. It's always just like, it seems like everybody's bashing their head against the wall, waiting for governments to step up how they do things a little differently. But one thing I wanted. Oh, go ahead,
Silas. So one thing to add to that is that so I think that's super exciting, and I think it's great to get more entrepreneurial people into government, and that's why I stepped away from government, right? Like I think if I could feel like I could make a difference internally, then I would absolutely go into it, because I think it's just so great to do that work. The other thing is that a lot of investors and a lot of people in the climate tech space understand that this is a complex regulatory environment that we have to understand, and also have a responsibility and a duty to have an impact on. And so a lot of companies will start and lobby government, or investors will lobby government for hopefully things that are actually helpful to the larger community, but also helpful for the company, right? And help them spread clean tech and spread, zero carbon energy. So I wanted to just emphasize that yes, entrepreneurs can go in the government, but also entrepreneurs can lobby the government and actually get policies to be changed in their favor and in the environment's favor.
Yeah, that's actually another interesting topic that was brought up recently on the show. Was somebody mentioned it tends to be that, especially on a federal level, the large organizations that are incumbent that are changing are the ones with the lobbying dollars, right? So then policies might not actually get changed in per se the most beneficial way to everybody, but the most beneficial way to the company. But I do think, to me, there's something that I'm actually quite excited about is just you mentioned the ESG kind of movement, which is something I'm quite involved in with my work as well, is that it's just requiring transparency of everybody, right? So the more we have this transparency, the more we'll actually get the right answers and the right outcomes, because everybody is able to see what's happening, right? So I think that's interesting. One topic I did want to ask you about, I think you probably have some interesting perspective or just ways that you might share, because you said you're from Michigan, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say for people who might, especially in the holidays coming up here, might have family members or just people that they bump into on a daily basis that are not so sold on this idea of climate change being real? What are some of the biggest kind of ways that you encourage people to try to help educate them? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that, because I'm assuming you've probably gone through some of this yourself.
I have, yes. And step number one is to give up on the people who will not change their mind. If it's going to, if you know that someone's just going to be combative and take you down with them in terms of negativity or whatever it is, ignore them. There are enough people in the world who understand that climate is a thing to think about, but don't actually know what to do. And so I would actually focus on your aunt or uncle or cousin who understands that it's a bit scary or has those feelings coming up and doesn't actually know, they might not know what next step to take. And that's where you can point them toward resources and say, hey, I know you really care. It is scary. I'm so glad I'm doing this work. If you want to do anything related to this, here's a resource, right? So it could be climate cabinet and getting more involved in local government. It could be learning, reading a book, right? Or just saying, here's a really practical book, or here's a list of things that you could do, not only as a consumer to change your consumer habits, but also I'm way more interested in policy change and how communities can come together to make those bigger differences. So that's what I would focus on. If you really do want to try to flip someone who is a denier or just really negative, the best approach that I've found is to ask them about a place that they love. 99% of the time, it's going to be a nature place, right? Like, where do you feel really calm? Where do you love going to? It's probably some lake that they grew up next to. And you can just ask a question of has that lake changed recently? Like, what has your experience been throughout your lifetime? It's probably an older person, honestly, right? And that lake has probably changed, or that environment has probably changed even in the last 10 years in a way that is potentially uncomfortable. And so you could just be like, how would you want that lake to be long-term, or what are your goals? Like, what would you want your grandchild to see when they go to that lake, or whatever it is? And so I don't think you need that person to admit, yeah, clearly it's through man-made climate change, right? Like that, I don't really care if they get to that point. I just care more about like actually giving them a story that they can hold on to and think about, that is just a nugget for them to later be like, oh yeah, obviously, you can't change people overnight, but I think that's the most helpful thing.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think it's obviously frustrating at times, but I think the important part from what I've noticed is, especially with my own family, it's showing different like tiny nuggets here and there of like the efficacy of these different things, and then showing just the logical ways, because I notice where I come from, a lot of people are still operating on data from 20 years ago, right? That's kind of what their talking points are when this all was first a thing. So solar still doesn't work and all that stuff to them, right? But I appreciate that. Maybe I'm curious, what are some of the what are some of the things that you guys do with On Deck to try to identify potential entrepreneurs? Because I've bumped into just a few. I know there's a lot of technically focused people out there who are solving something, right? But I mean, they tend to be kind of doing this in a way that's not super public. It's not easy to find them. So what are some of the ways you recommend that you guys find them, and what are some of the ways that maybe other investors or maybe other business people can try to seek out these people to partner with them and to build something?
So is the question more geared toward how do we get an influx of people to come to us, or how do we sort through that influx to choose the people that we end up working with?
How do you get more people to come to you? But also, I would be curious to understand what your criteria are.
So for people to come to us, On Deck as a whole has done a pretty good job of just marketing. And so that really was step one. But we were the first sector, and we did, I'd say, get some phenomenal folks early on. And so our playbook that I think is totally replicable is to get folks who are on my dream list of people to be involved, right? And I just reached out to them cold. For the most part, if I had a warm intro, that'd be great. But like before I started this program, I had very little to no climate network. And now I feel like I have a reasonable climate network. And that really came from reaching out to a small handful of people that I like were my dream people. Some of them said no. Some of them said, I just don't have the time for this. So I'd say, great, can you be a speaker? For every speaker that I brought in, I said, hey, do you want to be a part of this program? And once we got the core group of people and we went public, people just saw who else was involved and said yes. And so I think the learning here that maybe is I think replicable in a lot of situations is have a really good story of what you're building. Because like I knew very clearly what I was building. And I also knew that I wanted it to be like co-created with other people so that it did meet what they wanted. And we iterated very quickly and all of that. So had a very clear story, but also was clear that like I am here serving them. Got them signed up, asked that, I could be public about the fact that they're involved, and then, got a ton of awesome people that way. And so a ton of people applied. I think the acceptance rate was about like 10 to 20% for the actual fellowship at any given moment. And so because of that, we were able to choose really high caliber people. And in terms of picking, the main thing that we were looking for was just a spike in something, right? So if they were climate deep, maybe had a PhD, maybe had 20 years of experience at this awesome company, had risen to VP or, some sort of high status within the company, or just were like deep experts in something. And that was very obvious. And on the entrepreneurial side, did they start fucking phenomenal companies that, were really successful? Were they really early at phenomenal companies? Did they have a PhD in something tech? Or, are they a professor in tech? And so really about spikiness, because we wanted people who were really deep experts in whatever they were really deep experts in. We wanted a variety of different types of deep experts so that they could meet each other and learn from each other and partner with each other and start more companies. So that's really it. I mean, it takes a while and takes some intentionality, but once you have folks who are bought in and who say like, yes, I'm part of this, make sure everyone knows that they're a part of this, but also ask them to spread the word. And that I think is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people have mentioned it. So you obviously have done a good job there. I think I've had just in the past couple of months, like 5 different people mention this. And I think one person in particular I had connected with is well on their way to getting a new opportunity because of this, right? Because they kind of made that transition, which kind of brings me to one of the final questions, unless you have any final thoughts, which is what are your recommendations to people who are in maybe some conventional space and they want to either shift entirely into climate tech or find a way to kind of help shift their own space that they're in to climate tech?
This is my favorite question by far. When I think about the guiding principles of the climate tech program that I built out, there were threefold. So one was imbuing everything that we did with stubborn optimism. And so that creates a bias for action, right? Like it's so easy to get bogged down in some of the negativity here. And two, especially if you're coming from a different space, think like, I have nothing to add. But if you can have some stubborn optimism, know that there's hope, then you have a bias for action. Second was more shots on goal, because we wanted to start more companies and just have more climate companies throw things at the wall and see what sticks. And thought that was really important. But the last thing is all hands on deck. And it's just getting way more people involved in the climate tech space, whether it's starting companies, advising, joining companies, whatever it is. And so a lot of our fellows have been people from outside of the climate tech space who have made that internal commitment that they are going to be committed to climate. And I really think that there are emotional pieces to this and then tactical pieces. The emotional piece is just knowing that you have something to offer and that it's worthwhile to do this, right? That you're not giving up anything, you're actually gaining a ton. And so one, the space needs you. I think if anyone here is listening and they want to get into the climate tech space, the space needs you, whatever your skill is, whether it's marketing or business development or software, there is a place for you, absolutely. And is it worthwhile to you? I think so. I think we're at the cusp of what it feels like in the, the beginning of the internet when that was starting. Like that is what this climate tech wave feels like. And that was actually told to me by someone who's at the cusp of the internet, right? So that is evidence of what a special place we're in right now, and you'll be ahead of the curve. And personally, I think there's money to be made. There are all these like sort of material reasons why you might come in, and if you feel like you have a family and you really are worried about supporting them, I think get rid of that worry. But just emotionally and like spiritually, almost like just having that mission, having that purpose of knowing that you're passionate about climate and you're actually taking action is, I think, the best way to get over any sort of pessimism about the climate tech space or climate, the future of climate. So that's the emotional piece of, or just a psychological piece of coming into the climate space. Tactical pieces are getting a job or meeting a co-founder. And my recommendations are, join My Climate Journey. I think it's a great all-around community. It reminders if you're really into carbon removal. There's, I think, the Climate Change Academy by John Sanchez, where you can dig into some problem sets. On Deck ClimateTech, obviously, come to us if you're interested. We're going to be, we have the accelerator model, and we're also going to do some build sprints where we're going to help people potentially meet co-founders and run experiments for things that they'd want to build. Lower Carbon, on their website, they have a list of all the job openings for all the companies that they've invested in. Climate Base has a bunch of companies. Terra.do has a bunch of companies and is great education. So tactically, I think if you're really interested in one industry within climate, go really deep in that industry, research as much as you can, learn every company that's in that space. But if you're industry agnostic and you just know that you're an incredible marketer, then search for every marketing job across the entire climate space, talk to a bunch of people and get in that way. But there are tons of opportunities and now's the time to get in.
Yeah, I think I agree. One thing as a recruiter that I've seen that to me isn't a problem yet, but it will be probably in the very near future with the explosion of capital into so many companies, which is obviously a great thing. But what oftentimes happens is that most companies, I wouldn't say it's delusional, but they really think that they're going to be the one company that attracts all of the best talent in the market, which at this point, there's very few people who are already experts, right? So that talent will be eaten up within, who knows, months or a year, right? It's not going to be long. So I'm curious on your take on just do you see any shifts happening within organizations themselves actually to go ahead and train people to realize, hey, we have to admit that we're not going to find somebody who might have exactly all the skill sets, but we're going to have to invest in their training. We have to make a sustainable culture of hiring people who may not have the technical expertise we need, but have the personality or motivators to do so. What are you seeing in that realm?
I think you're totally right that the deep experts are going to be and are being snagged immediately. And that actually a 6-month deep dive in any sort of new climate technology or whatever space that you're interested in makes you an expert. Like go spend 6 months on wildfires, or spend 6 months on the newest carbon removal technology that you're really interested in. Great. You're now in the top 0.5%, I don't know, 0.005% of the world. Like you are one of the world's experts at that point. And so if you want to be an expert and you know what industry you want to go in, do a shit ton of research. And I promise you, you will know more than almost anyone else in the space. And you'll be one of those people that's snagged up immediately, or you'll find an awesome company that you want to start in that space that other people have overlooked, but your unique lens has seen and sees the opportunity in it. But if you don't want to go that route for whatever reason, are not industry specific, companies absolutely are upskilling. So Patch, I know, does this where they send people a lot of resources to be updated. Terra.do is an education platform, but they do this as well for companies where, let's say you're a software engineer and you're going to be working in the carbon removal space. It's my the only example I have today, I guess. But let's say you're working in that space and you don't need to know the ins and outs of carbon removal, but you should know like a high level, at least, of what your company is doing. They have to train you on that. And so that might be a week training. It might be, a slow training over the coming months, but that's my thought, is either go deep if that's really what you want to do, or as a company, make sure that you know that you're going to have to train people on the climate side of things, with the caveat that for most of the roles that open up, climate expertise isn't the barrier to entry. It's often a skill. So it's probably mechanical engineering or nuclear engineering, right? Like you don't have to understand the climate science. You should, but you don't have to. It's really about knowing the skill that you're being hired for. So it doesn't feel like as big of a barrier to entry on that side of things. It is a barrier to starting a technical company in climate tech if you're not an expert. But like I said, take 6 months and you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great to hear. Obviously, I think that that probably encourages a lot of people because it is. I know I've had a lot of candidates who are interested in moving into the space, and even sometimes from renewables, right? They've already been in kind of the clean tech space, but going into climate is seems difficult. But I think that if you just power through, you'll make it. So, any closing remarks or thoughts that you wanted to offer before we close out the pod?
Just do it. Like if you are considering coming to the climate tech space, or you're already in it, know that you are doing what you can to make a difference. And I think that's all that we can aim to do. So if you're not in a space, try to get in. If I could be helpful, let me know. But just do it.
Awesome. Very good. And I'll definitely link for people to reach out to you and to get in touch with this program. I think I feel like a lot of people can really benefit from what you guys are doing. So really appreciate you coming on the pod, and we'll have to see you again in the future as more great things happen, especially with the accelerator. I'm really excited to see kind of the results of that, given the funnel, right, of the people coming in and just the visibility that you're having. So I think that to me, that's extremely exciting for you guys. I'm excited for you.
Thank you, Silas. Yeah, let's definitely be in touch. I would love to do this again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Candice.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode with Candice. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. Again, like I said before at the beginning, this is something that's super fascinating to me, this space of helping people upskill into the new areas. So I'm very, very interested to have this conversation. It was a great conversation, I think. And I guess if this is your first time, please do subscribe for more podcasts. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, we always really much appreciate a review to help us increase the reach. And of course, I think probably the most important thing that we can ask post-show here is to share this episode with people that you think might be interested in this program, or at least at the very minimum, share the On Deck platform and the On Deck website with somebody who you think could benefit from this. So that's really the biggest ask. Of course, we also ask if you're interested, please do consider joining the Slack channel if you want to get more involved with other professionals in the space and have conversation and discourse. Of course, you can subscribe to the newsletter, which comes out the 27th of every month, where we kind of dive into typically one topic area and discuss a few companies in it in brief. And then, of course, you can connect with Candice on LinkedIn, reach out to me on Twitter with any questions you have. And then in terms of next week, we will be talking with Charlie Welch, the CEO and co-founder of ZapBatt, which is really interesting. They have a very fascinating battery technology that we'll be discussing. So really excited for that conversation as well. But again, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. And as always, shout out to our sponsors, Next Wave Partners, for making this happen. And thank you so much. We'll see you next week.